Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast with Geoff Mosher and Adam Kaplan, and it's brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet, take your profit, find out how. PropSwap.com. Download the PropSwap app today. Geoff Mosher is here. We got a lot to discuss. Great games yesterday. Geoff Mosher, let's start with of the 4 games this weekend. What story emerges from that interests you the most? Is it the game itself? Is it what happens because of the results of the game? You sit here on this Monday and feel how about the results of these games?
Oh, Mike, that's a great question, and I'll try to answer it, but my feeling is you should, we don't want to take a weekend of football and then project and become prisoners of the moment for anything. For example, obviously a lot of people are saying today that after what they witnessed this weekend, they realize how far the Eagles are from being a really competitive team. Fair, but I mean, things can happen where you can improve yourself pretty quickly. So how far really are you? The year before the Eagles had Donovan McNabb, they were 5-11, right? Or no, that was Andy Reid's first year when they had McNabb, but it was really Doug Peterson starting. The next year, at the end of the year, they're in the playoffs and then on their way to a run of NFC Championship games. So, the one thing that is odd to me about the weekend is how many road teams won. I thought but that's been consistent this year where I think we had a record number. I think the road team had a winning record collectively this year in the NFL for either the first time ever or the first time in a long time. So wow. That's pretty fascinating. And of course it's, some of the obvious take is that when you have a quarterback at the level of a Patrick Mahomes or the level of a Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, pretty darn good too. Most of the time that's going to help you win games like these. It didn't work out for Aaron Rodgers, but the Bengals-Titans game is probably the one that you may look to draw a longer-term conclusion. The Titans have been to the playoffs many years. They've been a top seed. They've been a mid-seed. I mean, they've basically kind of brought that core to the playoffs and that running game and that defense. And at the end of the day, they are limited by how far they're going to go. And you look at Ryan Tannehill and say, he ain't Joe Burrow. When Ryan Tannehill gets sacked 9 times, he ain't winning. So that's got to be, for them, a reevaluation of how they have to. If you're the Titans today, you have to reevaluate what you're going to do at the quarterback position going forward, I would think.
Yeah, it's tough because they just gave him a pretty sizable deal, right? Tennessee?
They did, but I think this was the end of the second year of it. And usually, depending on how it's structured, usually by the end of the second year, you're paying out a lot of that guaranteed money. And I'm not saying they should get rid of him. I think what they should probably try to do, and what's been sort of, you're seeing teams doing that. The 49ers are literally in the midst of doing it too, which is keep your quarterback because he can win you games, but draft your future who you think is better than what you've got right now. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs really set that model, right?
Yeah.
When they had, they had what's his face, Alex Smith, and then drafted Mahomes, right?
Yeah. So, and I tweeted this out. You and I were kind of going back and forth a little on this, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, today's going to be the day where people are like, see, you got to have Allen, you got to give him, and it's like, yeah, I want those guys, but they don't really exist yearly. Like, it's not like, hey, we didn't get it done this year, so let's go get this guy. Like, that's where the rub comes in. Like, I'm quite okay with moving on from Jalen Hurts if you give me another option that is significantly upgraded. Not just a guy who's going to be similar, because if you're similar, you're not good enough. I need a guy that is Josh Allen or Mahomes that's the problem. And it's like, and I liken it to the NBA draft, where if you have the number 1 overall pick and you get LeBron James, that's great. The number 1 overall pick the next 10 years is not LeBron James. Like, you're not getting LeBron James just because you're picking first every year. So you're not getting Josh Allen just because you're drafting a quarterback in the first round of the draft. Like, and I feel like people just want to move on just to move on. And that's how you get stuck perpetually in Brownsville or formerly Cincinnati-ville or Raidersville or these teams, Detroit, that just can't move on because they're constantly chasing the quarterback.
Yeah. There's that. There's some of those teams that are always like just good enough, and I think the Saints and Steelers are about to kind of enter that realm where they're just good enough every year, even when they don't have their guy, to be like 9-7. So you're not picking in the top 5 or top 10. But there's some kind of there's probably a lesson to be learned in the fact that Mahomes and Allen weren't the first or quarterbacks taken in their respective drafts. I think that you should always be, and I think you agree with this based on what you said, you should always be in relentless pursuit for an elite quarterback. Always. If you don't have an elite quarterback or a quarterback that you think can win you a Super Bowl, you should be in the pursuit of one.
Mm-hmm.
But there are going to be times where you're looking around and you're like, well, there's not one in the draft and there's not one I can trade for. So what do I do until then? Well, you look, you try every single avenue you can, and if you can't, then you just try to make your team as best as possible. Try to maybe align yourself with some extra picks for the next year so that you can be in position to do that.
That's the key, though, Moshe. That's the key. Is if there's not a guy, don't just take a guy to take one and just hope. Build the team up so that you have this roster, so that Jimmy G can win for you. Jimmy G, right. No one's saying they want Jimmy Garoppolo over Aaron Rodgers, but Jimmy G has a roster around him that he doesn't have to be Aaron Rodgers to win.
And a coach probably that's probably another unsung theory or storyline from this is that the great coaches start to show you what they've got. I mean, you can lose with a great quarterback, right? The Packers just did. The Packers have done it a lot. They've had average coaches, in Mike McCarthy, and their front office has done a terrible job with special teams because Aaron's lost like 3 or 4 playoff games because of bad special teams. But guy like Kyle Shanahan, guy like Andy Reid, they know what they're doing. It's not just about their talent. Yes, they found that talent because, again, Mahomes wasn't the first guy taken, and Kyle Shanahan's built a great defense and a great team and a great scheme that's very hard to defend. So good for him to even be this far. Same thing with McVay. I mean, we roll our eyes about how much accolades he gets, considering he's never won a Super Bowl. But the guy is now 1 win away from being in 2 Super Bowls in his first 5 years. That's quite an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So the coaching, and that really, Mike, if you think about the Eagles, like I don't know that I think we can credit Nick Sirianni for what he did, but still say I don't really know what he is as a coach. I mean, he had to kind of do it in a way that even he doesn't. The running the ball is not his experience. That's not what he came from. He coached under Todd Haley. He coached under out in the Chargers where they were throwing the ball with Rivers. Yes, they ran the ball with Frank Reich in Indianapolis, but not to the extent that they did it this year. So this is it'll be interesting to see what they really have in Nick Sirianni as well.
That's a good point. When you take a look at this weekend too, you got Joe Burrow. He was the first pick, and when you get that guy, he covers up a lot of the problems. Their offensive line's horrible, but He covers up those problems. They went and got Jamar Chase. I thought they should have taken a lineman in this draft because your quarterback tore his ACL the year before, and they got through it. But it's like this is where you find out about, like, Burrow seems to be, Geoff, that special guy. That he can make the team better more so than you have to have all these pieces around him to make them better. Now, he has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Boyd. They're really good. But if they can't block for him, I wonder how many runs at it can they go. Now, they should be able to focus on building that line now. But
they should be able to.
That's where it's interesting. Like, there's so few Joe Burrows. I think Josh Allen and Mahomes kind of put themselves in that class. And somebody texted in, as a fan, it's frustrating to hear that you can't get that franchise quarterback. Yeah, they just are hard to get. They're just so rare to find. And I think we found one in Burrow this year. But if you found one in Burrow this year, that probably means there's not another one coming around for a little while.
I know. I mean, you found one in Burrow from 2 years ago. And then last year, the number 1 pick was Trevor Lawrence, who I think people thought was going to be excellent. And obviously, I think the conditions around him he could not have been excellent even if he was excellent. It'll be very interesting to see if he's excellent.
That's like forward. Matthew Stafford. Like, my biggest question with him is, people said, well, he was on the Lions. That's not his fault. Joe Burrow plays for the Bengals. The point is, when you get drafted number 1 and you're great, You change the culture of that place from a losing mentality, and you change it. And Stafford was never able to change the fact that the Lions were losers. Burrow is doing that now. He is changing. The Bengals are no longer looked at as losers.
That is true, but at the same time, we don't know the future. They may lose and then have a bad year next year. I'm not ready to say, as much as I love
Josh Allen,
that
the Bills were losers. The Bills were losers, and Josh Allen has made them no longer losers.
Absolutely, 100% better.
And see, when you get that guy,
Matthew Stafford did. It's not like he was a perpetual loser in the line. He did make the playoffs, I think, twice with them, right?
3 times.
He couldn't win. Yeah, he couldn't win enough there. But he's showing you he's a pretty good quarterback this year.
Oh, no, and he was old. Yeah. That was the odd part about it. That even though the team stunk, and it's like if you have this good quarterback, your team should be good. And he was a good quarterback, and the team was never good. It was like the weirdest dynamic.
Right. Yeah, it is. And look, I mean, I think that just shows you that when I say you should always be in a relentless pursuit of an elite quarterback at all costs. And again, I'm not saying you should, like, if you're the Eagles this year, you should package all 3 picks and move up to the top 5 to draft Kenny Pickett if you don't have him graded as an elite talent. So don't reach. I would never say that to get a quarterback, which is what you're saying as well. But look, if it means, getting it young, if you can get a young quarterback and you have to give up some of these picks, I think you do it, because if you look at the Eagles and their history, when they've been great, it started with more recently started with Donovan McNabb, took them pretty darn far, got them to a Super Bowl, 4 NFC championship games. We know that. And then, of course, they were on the right track with Carson Wentz. They had the right idea. They traded up. They made 2 different trades. They gave up a lot of assets. They had Wentz. He had a good rookie year. By year 2, he's winning them 12 games. You can't predict some of the stuff that happened after but I think you can't just project that onto your next quarterback. I think you just have to say it works for us when we get quarterbacks top 5.
There's 2 teams that are still alive that are going to be interesting case studies, Jeff. The Rams have no draft picks for 5 years. They just said, we're going for it. For all the flack that Philadelphia gets for their misses in the first round, and they deserve it, Kansas City hasn't even had a first-round pick for 4 out of 5 years. I mean, they took Mahomes in 17. They had no pick in 18, no pick in 19, no pick in 21. They had no pick in 16. They have no first-round players on the roster.
It's amazing.
So they're winning without first-round talent on their team.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see, like, if you're looking at that and saying, okay, well, the Rams have no first-round picks. Kansas City's not winning because they have first-round picks. What do we do?
Do we do the right thing? Right. Yeah, that'll be the question. But I think what they're showing you, you have a pretty big enough sample size with the Chiefs, who haven't had one, as you mentioned, for 4 or 5 years, to say, well, when you have a quarterback that good, he's going to compensate. Yeah. And by the way, I don't want to take credit away. Their scouting and personnel department is really good. Chris Jones is one of the best pass rushers in the league. He was a 3rd-round pick. The kid, Travis Kelce, was not a 1st or a 2nd-round pick. They rebuilt their offensive line. Creed Humphrey was a 2nd-round pick, one of the best centers in football now. The right tackle that they got was a rookie. I mean, they spent some money, which you always have the ability to do. They've done a good job. Their best cornerback, Snead, not a 1st-round pick. They have good scouting.
Oh, absolutely. But that was part of my point is we get very narrow-minded that there's only one way to build, and if you're not great at that, then your team's a failure. You know?
Nope. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
There seems to be, and I think this weekend really showed a lot of the different ways to do it. All these teams have different ways that they've kind of got there. Some have great quarterback. San Francisco, they've been a team that has nailed first-round pick. They got Bosa, and they got Debo, and the other receiver that they
Armstead was a first-round pick.
Armstead, right. 2 sacks in the game for Armstead. Brandon Ayuk was a second-round pick. I mean, they have hit some high draft choices. But they don't have the great quarterback. So there's these different.
Ayuk, I think, was a first-rounder, if I'm not mistaken. He went just a few picks after Rager in the first round, if I'm not.
He's either was after Jefferson or high in the second round. But, he was somewhere around there. I think, that's the interesting part, though, is that all these teams have done it somewhat differently. Like, you look at all 8 teams this weekend, none of them really have the same story.
No, that's True. The two teams with the same story just played each other last night in the greatest game I've ever seen in my life. That's basically it.
Now, where do you like? Okay, so I'm having this conversation with Chris Russell down there in D.C., and he was saying, like, for all these people blaming the special teams, his point was like Pringle's a good returner, and you're not guaranteed. Like, if he takes it out to the 45, I said, but yeah, then if he takes it out to the 45, how many seconds did it take him to get to the 45?
Yeah, no, I think that they probably should have squib kicked it down the middle.
See, I'm not saying. I don't think you can squib kick it. I think you got to kick it short.
Short kick it.
Because if you squib kick it, you could catch it and fall right on it and kill the clock pretty immediately wherever you are. And that means you might have the ball at the 40 or 45 and no time comes off the clock.
Correct. It is hard to short kick, and you never know what happens. But, I mean, listen, if it was easy, everybody would be able to do it. So you're in the game right there. You practice it all week long. You should probably be able to do it.
Right.
But as far as overtime, I like overtime the way it is because there's no real perfect answer. You could convince me. The only change that you could convince me on would be both teams get at least one possession, and if they both score touchdowns, then after that you kind of go into whoever now that everybody's had the ball once, then you go into the same format where if the next team scores a touchdown again, then the game's over, or if it's field goal, the other team scores a touchdown. You're still going to get the whole, well, that was unfair, but I mean that's the reality of it. But I wouldn't change it. The only thing that I would say for people who say that you have the ability to get a stop just as much as the team has the ability to score. Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's a great argument, only because the rules are so heavily tilted toward favoring the offense in the passing game. If I thought it was truly 50-50 and easy to get a stop, but I mean, you breathe on a guy, it's a flag 30 yards down the field now. So it's sort of it's not a level playing field in that regard.
Yeah, I don't think that needs to be fixed, but if you said do something, mine would be, Moshe, the coin toss at the start of the game. What your decision is there is also your decision in overtime. So if you defer to start the game, you're deferring in overtime. If you take the ball to start the game, you get the ball in overtime. So it takes the coin flip aspect out of it, but it puts strategy into the beginning of the game. So do I want to defer if we go to overtime? You're not thinking about overtime, so you're deferring. So now when it gets to overtime, you've now deferred, and you made that choice back at the beginning of the game. That's on you.
That's pretty interesting. You could also, real quick, maybe say whoever had the ball the last possession, the other team gets the first possession of overtime, because then you run the risk of, all right, the Chiefs score 13 seconds left, force overtime. Now the Chiefs' offense is right back on the field in overtime, right? And your defense has to be out on the field twice. So you're already at a disadvantage defensively, and now you've got to throw your defense on the field 2 times in a row.
What if you literally just like the end of the third to the fourth quarter, you keep the ball, you just switch sides? What if the fourth and the overtime was the same? Wherever that game is stopped in the fourth, you just continue playing as if the game
That's not bad either.
So if you have the ball on the 45-yard line and you're driving, the quarter ends, you start overtime with the ball on the 45. You just flip sides.
I bet all of it's been discussed before, and at the end of the day, they're like, nah, we're just going to keep a wing out.
Well, that's the thing.
Theater.
To me, there's not – like the college rule's awful with the back and forth. It's like a gimmick, and then after the fourth time you score, you go to 2-point conversions. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right.
So I don't think there's just a good scenario. So I don't have a problem with keeping it the way it is. If you told me you have to change something, that was my idea. All right? That's what I'm going with.
And by the way, people feeling bad for Josh Allen, like that was Patrick Mahomes 3 years ago. He was in the AFC Championship game his first year as a starter, and they went to overtime against New England. Brady got the ball first, scored a touchdown, and that was it. Otherwise, Mahomes might have 2 Super Bowls by now.
Well, Mahomes, Andy Reid is the only coach to go to 4 straight in the AFC and in the NFC. Now, somebody texted this in earlier, Moshe. If the Eagles never fire Andy Reid, is Patrick Mahomes the quarterback for Philadelphia?
I've thought a lot about this. Just the idea of what if the Eagles never fired Andy Reid?
Okay.
I don't think so.
Because they made a trade in that year's draft to get Derek Barnett. They moved up to 14. So
they traded up? I thought they were organically picking 14 that year.
I'm pretty sure they traded with Minnesota to get that pick. We're looking
No. You know what? That was the tiebreaker, right? Didn't they have to coin flip at the combine to determine Was that from the Sam Bradford? No, I'm all messed up in the head, but I think that was their organic pick, but they beat Minnesota in a coin
flip. You're right.
It
might have been. All right. It was the Sam Bradford pick. Okay. Yep.
Right. So,
and they didn't have their own pick that year.
Right. They had Minnesota's pick then, right?
Right, but they didn't have their own pick. They gained because I was saying, I saw it said from Minnesota, and then I said, well, where did Minnesota pick? They got it from Bradford, and Philadelphia didn't have a pick that year because they traded it in the Wentz deal.
Right. And that pick, I think, was a coin flip between Minnesota, which went to Philadelphia, and some other team, either Baltimore or Indianapolis, to determine who would have it. But nonetheless, I to answer your question, I would say no, it would not. I think the beauty of and this is going to sound like criticism, the Eagles have won a Super Bowl since, so whatever. But the beauty of Andy going to Kansas City is that the owner said, all right, Andy, I'm going to hire the guys you tell me to hire. So he hires Dorsey. They bring in Brett Veach. Like, they bring in Andy's guys that he is comfortable with, that he has a lot of clout with. And then basically the owner flies back to Dallas where he lives and lets Andy and his people run the show in Kansas City. Clark Hunt being the owner. Yeah, he lives in Dallas.
Yeah.
So I don't think in Philadelphia, had they carried on with Andy, if anything, they were starting to take power away from him after a while and force coaches on him. I don't think I think the front office is still Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie is still involved. So I don't think they let Andy just be Andy here in Philadelphia, and that causes complications. Yeah.
I'll get you out on this. And I know it's just a hypothetical, but Jeff Lurie and Roseman are watching that game yesterday. They're watching football all weekend long. At the end of the day, what do they say to each other about this offseason after watching those 4 games?
It's a great question. I mean, this is the franchise that has told you they believe in the dynamic passing offense and the importance of the quarterback position more than anything. And,
does Jeff Lurie watch those 4 games and say, we've got our guy?
He probably said, let's place one more call into Deshaun Watson and then everything else going around. Let's do one more legal check onto everything before we officially make a decision there.
Yeah. Well, they're going to be in on Aaron Rodgers?
I don't know. I sense that Aaron might stay in Green Bay or either look to go to a place that's either warmer. I honestly think the Lambeau impact, I'm not trying to make excuses for the guy, but that might not be the best. Like, it's who plays great. Have you seen great, awesome quarterback play in Lambeau in those temperatures? Usually you see these ugly defensive games. He may just want to do like Brady did and go somewhere. I could see him going to San Francisco, right? If they're moving on from Garoppolo and not ready to go to Trey Lance, and he made San Francisco pay. But I just don't see it happening in Philadelphia. But I could be wrong.
Deshaun Watson doesn't really want to come here, right?
I don't know. I mean, for all the reports, he wanted to go to Miami, right? But the guy who really wanted him in Miami isn't there anymore.
Well, right.
They want to build around Tua.
It's going to be interesting to see if Flores gets a job based on the fact that he's saying, hey, this guy's going to come with me. And if that team says, we want to bring that guy with you, right?
Oh, how painful would it be if the Giants got Deshaun Watson and then he winds up getting cleared of a lot of trials? It's not what it seems, and then he's not much of a risk. The Giants bring him in, and now you got to face that guy and Dak.
Yeah,
4 times a year.
And then I guess the last guy's Wilson. Now, John Clayton was on our show last week and said it's the worst story in 50 years of covering the league that Russell Wilson is not getting traded.
So he thinks Russell Wilson is not getting traded.
That's what he said. I actually have the clip if you want to hear it.
No, I listen, John Clayton. I trust John Clayton.
No, I'm just saying, like, that to hear how he worded it, how I'm wording it might not be giving it justice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find the clip. I don't know what I do with it. It's on the text board.
Well, if he's not getting traded and that's the deal, then he's not getting traded. So it's becomes a moot point.
I think most people just assume that he's going to get traded because they didn't make the playoffs this year, and that there was some stuff. Here it is. All right, I found it. Here you go. You ready? I'll play it for you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I mean, again, everybody asks Russell Wilson trade, Pete Carroll getting fired. I mean, it's the most ridiculous story I've covered in 50 years covering the NFL. 50 years. And it's the most ridiculous, stupidest story I've ever heard. I mean, if you get rid of Russell Wilson, you're now a 4-win team. You think they want to do that?
pretty emphatic, right?
Well, I guess that's pretty strong. But it also sounds like he's just saying like this sounds ridiculous. Does he know if what I want is concrete? Because then why is there all this conjecture about it? That stuff doesn't usually make itself up.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
So,
all right, Geoff Mosher, we got a big offseason here. So much to talk about. Inside the Birds, what's the new schedule? You have a schedule change or anything for the people out there?
this is the last week of our regular schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Inside the Birds pods at 6 a.m. And then next week we'll shift to Tuesday, Thursday, twice a week at 6 a.m. And we are diligently working on a few projects. So I look forward to trying to announce them whenever they are ready to be announced. But we're always trying to add content and add shows, and we are working toward that end.
All right. Well, when something happens, you'll let us know. We'll tell the people. I know we have a lot of dual listeners. Football at 4, Inside the Birds.
Quez Watkins still listening? I saw has he commented lately?
It's a whole nother story. I'll have to tell you sometime off the air.
Sure. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you, Geoff Mosher. Tell Adam I'm not 47, though. 45.
48. Got it.
Thank you. All right. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast.